Alright everyone, we're back with some more Pokémon Legends Kyurem. Since last time I made a map and sorta ended up lore dumping the entire main story onto you guys, I thought today I wanted to switch gears and focus solely on designing Pokémon today. First off, before I start, thank you all so much for 5,000 subscribers. We hit 5K a few days before the last video came out, but this is the first video that I'm writing and recording after the milestone. So that's crazy. Thank you all so much for the support. It's insane that so many people watch these videos at this point. I never even thought that I would get this far, and it's just amazing. I know I probably sound like a broken record, but thank you. If you remember last time when I made the map, one of the areas was called the Castilia grasslands. I drew it in place of Route 4 in the Desert Resort. As a refresher, in my version of the Unova story, the Desert Resort areas started off as a lush fieldland and fresh river system, until the climax of the story, where the battle between the newly split Reshiram and Zekrom dries up the land and kills off the plants in the area, letting the land eventually become a desert by the time that Pokemon Black and White roll around. This seemed like a perfect setting to create some alternate forms for the desert Pokemon that can be found there. Pre-desertification forms, if you will. Of course, I won't be calling them that, they'll still just be ancient forms, but you get the picture. I immediately had two Pokemon lines in mind that I thought would make great pre-desert forms, and those are the Scraggy line and the Sandile line. Although I love both of the designs that I came up with today, we'll start off with the Scraggy and Scrafty line, as I think that this one has a more unique concept. There's no nice way to say this, but Scraggy and Scrafty are based mainly on the stereotype of juvenile delinquents. More specifically, the stereotype that these rebellious teens will wear saggy pants as a fashion trend. While being slightly related to lizards and their shed skin, this is one of those Pokemon that shifts slightly further towards the more anthropomorphized human inspiration. When it came to Scraggy, I knew pretty early on that I wanted to take inspiration from the fashion trends of the 1700s, if anything to keep a level of consistency between the two designs. Incorporating the motifs of the high fashion of the day in the high collar, extravagant overcoats, and brightly dyed fabrics, I justified the new looks by considering the more lush environment that the Pokemon would live in when compared to the modern counterpart. Thinking along the lines of the humidity would keep their skin from sagging. I also decided that another great fashion trend of the day and region to pay homage to would be the powdered wigs. Synonymous with the politicians of the day, these wigs were in fact widespread throughout the upper classes, and signified a level of, quote, higher dignity. In reality, it was to cover up baldness, as a full head of hair was perceived as more attractive at the time. Scraggy, the high fashion Pokemon. They appear to be drawn to, and often are compelled to create, music. They are observed to have a fondness for music of the orchestral variety. Their outer layer of skin resembles clothes that can be found in high society, and they take great pride in the upkeep of their looks. This skin will wilt and lose pigment should the humidity in its environment drop. I related Scraggy with classical music, as of course that was the popular music of the day, and I wanted to keep some consistency as the original design seems to have its own musical inspirations, with some ties to both the hip-hop and alternative rock music movements of the 90s. With Ancient Scrafty, I carried over the theme of the pompous high-class citizen, using its fashion to signify its status. I let this further influence this Pokemon's demeanor. I changed its personality slightly. Instead of being a grumpy and annoyed teenager, it would act like a pompous high-class citizen within the fashion-in crowd. With its hands on its hips and an upturned nose, it implies this holier-than-thou attitude that the high class of the time stereotypically had. I also wrote its Pokédex entry to reflect this. Not only that, but I worked off of the stereotype of parents not understanding the fashion trends of their teenagers, And in that same vein, this explained how the high-class mimicking of the ancient Scrafty would eventually come to be the saggy pants version in the modern day. Scrafty, the high-fashion Pokemon and the evolved form of Scraggy. They take great pride in their appearance and appear to follow fashion trends that develop amongst their local groups by styling their scales and head crests into unique shapes. Scrafty who refuse to follow these social norms are exiled from their group. These exiles are found to create their own groups with their own unique styles. Although the vast majority of Scrafty turn up their noses at these alternative groups, the young from the main colonies often appear to enjoy mimicking the newest fads. Sandile, Krookodile, and Krokorok are all based on, you guessed it, crocodiles, but with an interesting modern twist. They comparatively have a lot in common with the modern fantasy trope of the land or sand shark, a shark-like beast that can swim in the sands instead of water. When compared to Scraggy and Scrafty, my inspirations behind my version of Sandile is admittedly a little less unique. An easy thought was just to make this a water type, but I knew it would get very boring very quickly if I left it at that. So I knew that I had to give it some sort of unique quality as to simply not make it a water croc. I took the implied sunglasses of its original form and gave it a set of what resembles swimming goggles. This both refers to the human invention and the transparent flaps that crocodiles have above their eyes. I added these red spines that sort of made it resemble Totodile, and for a bit I considered giving it Totodile's color palette to maybe suggest a common ancestor. Although I went a slightly more unique green-tinted direction, I would end up adding some ancient animal traits to the later designs that would further relate the two lines. Sandile, the river croc Pokemon. Sandile are primarily found on or near the sandy banks of calm lakes and rivers. Over their eyes they have a set of transparent lenses that shield their eyes from dirty water and aid in their sight below the surface. Sandile young mimic the hunting style of their evolved forms by hiding just below the surface of the water and leaping out in surprise attack. Young Sandile often aim these surprise attacks at one another as a form of play. Krokorok is both my favorite and least favorite of the designs that I did. While I believe it's technically the best representation of the original monster, I also feel like I didn't stray far enough to make it feel like its own unique design. Of course, I kept the goggles and the spines that became a punky mohawk. However, I don't know if this was enough to differentiate it from its first form, although it being on its hind legs definitely helps. In the original line, Krokorok doesn't add that much onto Sandile anyways, so I kept it like this as I felt it fit. That being said, with the addition of its final form that ties the line together, I am very pleased with what I came up with, as this more transitional stage both looks nice on its own and allows the Pokemon on either end of the evolutionary line to stand out uniquely. Since my Krokorok adds very little to the concepts of the first form, I admittedly have very little to say about it, and therefore think it's a good time to explain its abilities submerged. The submerged ability acts as sort of like a snow cloak or sand veil for water-type Pokemon. For 2 to 5 turns after flooding moves like Surf or Muddy Water are used, this Pokemon will get an evasion boost. This is based on how crocodiles and alligators will submerge themselves in water up to nothing but their eyes to sneak up on prey. Krokorok, the river croc Pokemon and the evolved form of Sandile. They have a reputation for being punkish. They use their sharp teeth and intimidating spines to scare away enemies. It is observed that these Pokemon tend to be over-aggressive, and it is theorized that they enjoy fighting as some sort of sport or game, as not only will they fight intruders into their territory, they will often fight each other for fun. When relaxing, they are observed to cover themselves in hot sand. Krookodile was the most difficult of the three to do. Not necessarily because of the way it is shaped, as the Pokemon is actually relatively easy to replicate. Rather, I knew if I just overdeveloped the physical traits of the last two forms into this one, I would be very disappointed. Krookodile is one of these Pokemon that is not simply a grown-up or amped-up version of the pre-evolved form, but it takes its own steps in its physical characteristics outside of the concept of the evolution line. With this in mind, I allowed myself to change more than I would usually be comfortable with this Pokemon, and I think that this was to my benefit. I knew I wanted to add the fighting type, and though usually working backwards into a concept can be a tricky thing to pull off, I feel like this worked for this particular design. I decided to relate it to cavemen, not only because I wanted the fighting type to show in the sort of barbarism side of the design, but I also wanted to reference how ancient crocodiles actually are, having gone relatively unchanged, evolutionarily speaking, since before the time of the dinosaurs. Although the original design seems to draw some inspiration from the gharial, I further exaggerated the thin snout of the design, as I personally think that the bizarre look of gharials looks more prehistoric than just regular crocodiles. To push the design further into the barbarism inspirations, I added some scary, almost weapon-like horizontal teeth to the end of the snout, sharpened the red spines, and gave it these spiked cuffs on its wrists. I also added a stylized set of head spines that would be made to look like stereotypical caveman hair held into a bun by a bone. And though I know crocs don't have hair, it felt appropriately prehistoric. I was glad that in the end I was able to relate this line to the Totodile line, as in the way that both lines are tied in some way, shape, or form to crocs and how truly ancient they are. And both of the lines represented this in the way that they have anthropomorphized features that resemble cavemen. It dawned on me at the end how much this version looks like Bowser, but I'm all here for it. Krookodile, the cave caiman Pokemon and the evolved form of Krokorok. These monstrous Pokemon are highly aggressive, seeking out fights with anything that moves. They are considered highly dangerous. They use their barbaric bulk and their saw-like snout to defeat their foes. An old or elderly Krookodile will have scars across its body, telling the tales of its many past battles. Recent discoveries suggest that this Pokemon has gone unchanged for millions of years, no doubt due to the stability of its home environment, the Castilia Fieldlands. It is unknown what would happen to these Pokemon were this environment ever to change. Now, of course, we know exactly what happens to it, but the people of the 17th century have no idea what will happen to this Pokemon in the next 200 to 300 years. So, here are the 5 new Pokemon designs for this video. I think each of them brings a unique concept and execution of said concept to the table. But as always, y'all are the judge, and you'll have to let me know what you think in the comments below. Speaking of, this is episode 5, which means we're exactly halfway through this mini-series already. So, with that in mind, please continue to comment any ancient Pokemon ideas you have before the series comes to an end. I already have like one video planned out in a few episodes that is almost entirely made up of fan ideas, and they're all so good. I'd hate for one of you to come up with a great idea and then miss out having it feature in the series. Next episode, I feel like switching gears yet again and focusing on some more story-focused aspects in designing human characters that would be your rival and traveling companions, along with their Pokemon companions, of course. If you have any ideas for these characters or their Pokemon companions, please leave them in the comments below. And in the meantime, keep an eye out and get excited for that video. Until next time, thank you all again for 5,000 subscribers. It seriously means the world. And as always, if you like this video and want to see more like it, then subscribe. And turn on the bell to get notified when I upload next.